raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome, Patriots, to Raising Cain. We have got quite a lot of interesting topics that we're going to be getting into tonight, and I am excited to have on my guest tonight, Teddy Pierce, an American patriot, philosopher, warrior poet, a passionate writer, speaker, and political commentator dedicated to exposing the globalist agenda and defending American sovereignty. Teddy is the author of the explosive new book, Dethrone Davos, Save America. I'm right now about halfway through the book, and I got to tell you guys, this is definitely a really good book that you guys need to read. It exposes so many of the myths that have been out there about our country, and really it gets into a lot of these folks that are basically running things at Davos and within the globalist elite. Teddy is an author. He is also, his book, by the way, is available now on Amazon in print, Kindle, and on Audible, which is how I like to go through my books when I'm driving and listening. With a background in Aristotelian, that's a hard word, philosophy and Thomistic Natural Law ethics, Teddy brings deep intellectual firepower to the fight for truth, liberty, and constitutional government. He's a relentless advocate for realism and a vocal opponent of collectivist ideologies, relativism, and the creeping influence of global control. When he's not exposing the ruling class and their narratives, Teddy enjoys spending time with his family, all from their undisclosed location. I have to laugh because when I was writing up my intro, my wife saw that and she goes, "I wish that was you saying that about our location." But, so as it be, as a former whistleblower, we've had our interesting run-ins, but he plans to keep his situation nicely disclosed. So for me, I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location in the bunker of my home in West Virginia, somewhere. And with that said, Teddy, thank you for joining us tonight and welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation.
Definitely. So I'm going to go ahead and dispense with our commercials, get them out of the way. And when we come back from our break, then we're going to jump right into questions. So folks, stick with us. We will be back after a few short messages, and then we will get into tonight's topics. And you're in for a real surprise. I think it's going to be a great show. Be right back.
It says, I woke up this morning and looked out the door to a country I don't recognize. They put masks on our face to hide our pain, and there's no fire in most people's eyes. And it's still true today. It's still true today that they've tried to destroy the American spirit. And in some instances, they've done a dadgum good job. But in other instances, they have lit an inferno in some people. And we right now are gathering some of those people that are on freaking fire to save this country.
Increasing expenses have caused us all a lot of pressure these days, and it's affecting even the wealthiest of people. Most have lost their sense of security, stability, and even hope for a strong financial future. The game plan of everyone in your cell phone has likely been disrupted or even hardcore stopped, and most are looking for a creative solution to regain financial momentum. Oftentimes, life's best solutions are the simplest. But first, a question. What is something most people think they should own but don't? Crypto? Fine art? Real estate? Nope. We are talking about real money. The kind kings and queens fought for and large institutions today buy in mass. We're talking about gold and silver, assets that provide confidence in tough financial situations. So the question is, do you own any? If you don't, you're not alone. Most people aren't maximizing the power of precious metals because it's just been too complicated. And even though they see advertisements about gold and silver daily, they don't really know who to trust. That is, until now. The bottom line is that buying gold and silver doesn't have to be complicated or scary. There's a simple, better way to accumulate assets and create financial peace, headache-free. And this very minute, a new community of average people are seeing above average results to the tune of tens of millions in assets over the last few years. This system is tested, it's simple, and it's not an experiment. To date, it's helped more than 80,000 people bring hope back into their lives. It's invitation only, and right now, this new community has accepted a challenge to give away as much free gold this year as possible. Curious? Learn how to get your free gold today. Check out the next step to get the details.
Welcome to Shop with America, where the emphasis is on America. Our movement is to switch away from your shopping with the big box stores and the mega corporations back to supporting family-owned, made in America. We've been giving these big box stores our money every day for years. But what's happened is they've forced many small businesses to shut down. We call this the illusion of choice. We see all these products in these stores, but in reality, it's only a few companies that control it all. There are thousands of lawsuits for health damage because they put profit over our people. But there is another choice. We found a better way. There's a family-owned American factory with product integrity and have always done things the right way for the right reasons. And this company outperforms the big box stores. That's due to their month-to-month shopping club. They make everyday consumer products that we all use and buy again and again, like toothpaste, shampoo, coffee, and organic beef. Go to shopwithamerica.us today.
I lost audio.
How's that? Sorry about that. I was talking to myself. I had my my mic muted. Forgive me, guys. I was saying we got a lot of great people in the chat, and we've got. I want to thank everybody for joining tonight. We got somebody that's joined us. This is my story. It's joined us from looks from Washington, state of Washington, and I know we got some West Virginia folks in here. Thank you, Harry Legg, for joining. And also, I see that we've got in Facebook, we got Mike Turner. Thank you for wishing me a happy birthday. Yes, it is my 50th birthday today, and it's been a great day. So I want to just thank you, all of you who've been praying for me for me being able to get a job again, because my clearance had run into a problem. And now I am employed again. As of today, I got my offer letter, and it has been a wonderful day with lots of great news. So I'm expecting tonight's show to be awesome, because it's just been one great thing after another today. For many of you guys that joined me, we had a really great show earlier this week with talking about JFK files and talking about how there was just an unbelievable amount of corruption within the deep state in this country and the powers that be. And tonight is going to be an interesting story because it's kind of complementary to what we talked about there. In that case, it was really the military industrial complex wanting to start wars all around the world, and and the CIA wanting to deal with opium trade and all of that. Joint Chiefs of Staff wanting to get us into Vietnam. But the fact is that we've got problems today that are not all too different. The problem is now a lot of these people are not even inside our own country. They're over in places like Davos in Europe. And really, a lot of these people, I don't even think even have any loyalty to a nation. They are globalists. And so our guest tonight is an expert on this topic, and we're going to be getting into that. Like I mentioned before we ran our commercials, I have been reading his book. I'm on the 6th chapter. I think there's 13. How many chapters are there?
15
chapters. So I'm not quite halfway, but it is a page turner. And I got to tell you guys, there's a lot of really good information in this book, and I would highly recommend you get it. The book is called Dethroned Davos, and it is Dethroned Davos, Save America, and by our guest, Teddy Pierce. It is available on Amazon, and it is also available on Audible if you're like me and you like to listen to your books, Kindle as well. So folks, you definitely got to check this out. So Teddy, before we get into the topic of tonight, I want to ask, how did you get into this, and really what drove you into studying and researching about the globalists and that whole problem that we're dealing with today?
Yeah, well, my educational background is in philosophy, and you word it that way because if you go to law school, you come out a lawyer. Med school, you come out a doctor. But if you get a degree in philosophy and you deign to call yourself a philosopher, you just sound like a stuck-up prig. So,
well, my daughter would say that you're not the pretentious type though, because you're not wearing the cardigan with the scarf.
That's true. That's true. So yeah, with studying classical philosophy, starting with Socrates and good old Uncle Aristotle, and then working my way through the natural law, that was really my educational background. And it's something that as you study, you realize, studying Western philosophy, that we have had a great and rich history stolen from us in this modern, liberal age that we live in. And I'd always been fascinated with the American form of government. I understood that we had something here that was special. And really what I started to see were a couple of different cultural movements, particularly with movies, as I was a young parent and watching movies again for my kids, and want to make sure that they're not getting bad things put in there. And as I started to watch different things, and coming from the context of watching movies and TV shows that are made for adults, I started to see this creeping ideology come in, and it's the ideology of relativism. And we can get into that in a much greater depth. But it really came from this aspect of saying, it feels like the country is really going sideways. And even in the 90s, when I was a young kid and growing up, it was things were pretty good. A lot of systems were safe, a lot of things. But as I became a young parent in the 2000s, I was just seeing a lot of cultural shifts. And so I thought I was going to write this dusty philosophy tome about relativism, and maybe I could force my son to read it one day or something. That's about the extent of it. As I really got to digging, though, one of the things that just slowly began to emerge is that this is a very orchestrated event. It's not the slow, inevitable march of time and modernity. Right. This is a very deliberate march and movement of ideas, and it's happening on the cultural level. It's happening on the political level, and it's even entrenched in the way that our economy works. And so, peeling back these layers, you see some ugly truths start to emerge. But I was already too invested, and so like I said, the book ended up going in a different direction than I anticipated. But that was really the advent of writing it, and God works in mysterious ways. And so, what I ended up with as a book and as knowledge and understanding in the world, I realized I couldn't keep silent or just leave that part out because it was convenient or I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Well, it's interesting. Relativism is something that I first came into knowledge of when I think I was around maybe 17 years old. I had just become a Christian. I accepted Christ at 16 years old, having not grown up in a religious home. I was really the first in my family to get saved, and I had a very radical experience. But one of the things that a pastor of mine noticed was that I had a deep desire to learn, and I had I did terrible in school, but when it came to things that I enjoyed studying about, I did really well. And they call that ADD, but I got into studying the Bible, and in particular, I had a pastor that recognized that I had a gift for intellect, and he basically taught me a course in hermeneutics. And part of that was learning about relativism and understanding things like exegesis and there's and how you interpret the Bible and the deeper meanings of things, and looking at like Greek and Hebrew lexicons, all of that. But I remember he gave me a set of it was cassette tapes. I'm aging myself now, but it was Frank Peretti. And I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an author. He wrote the book, This Present Darkness. It's a fictional tale about this battle between good and evil with these angels and demons fighting this war over this little town. And it's a really excellent, kind of parable-like story. But he also did a lesson on relativism, and I will never forget it. For one, he's got this like almost annoying voice that is kind of high pitched and you can't get it out of your head. But he made this point about relativism that I'll never forget. He said relativisms have basically three kind of key pillars, or principles, if you'll call them that. The first one is that nothing is for sure. There is no truth, and nothing matters. Those are the three. And he says, now think about that for a minute. Nothing is for sure. I'm sure of that. Nothing is true. That's true. And nothing matters no matter what it is. And I mean, it's like, it is a ridiculous notion. And it's a logical fallacy to even have this idea of relativism. And so that impacted me. And then another book that I read, which was by C.S. Lewis, impacted me as well, because he gets into it with his book, Mere Christianity. And he talks about relativism and this notion. And so this is something that's been around for a while, but, obviously I think it was making its way in England, long before it really, came to our shores. But he makes a point that I think was very also, it stuck in my brain from a young age, which is that, look, even if somebody tells you what's good for you is good for you and what's good for me is good for me, that only works until somebody tries to cut in front of you in line, or somebody tries to steal he says a piece of orange, or something like that. But it's like, to me, breaking it down like that, it just decimates the whole argument of relativism. And that is what we're dealing with today. When you have people that, can look and say, oh, it's perfectly okay for a biological male to compete in women's sports, or it is, it's perfectly okay. I mean, that I don't like using the term slippery slope, but it really is. And what we've seen is this kind of like degradation of our values in America that have just been slipping into insanity, not even just a move to the left, but a move completely to the bottom of the hill. Like everything that we have gained, in terms of our just our greatness as a nation and our greatness as a Western culture is being stolen from us, and we are being knocked off the top of the hill and pushed down to the bottom very rapidly, to total degradation and the destruction of our culture. And I would say the destruction of humanity, for that matter. So
Yeah.
sorry for my little rant there, but I love this issue is so important. I want people to really understand and take this to heart, this issue of being able to identify this false idea, really a logical fallacy of relativism. So sorry, continue. And, let us tell how do people identify that? First of all, you mentioned about movies, right?
Yes.
Let's give the folks that are in the chat and that are watching a practical primer, if you will, on how to identify this stuff in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, great. So recently watched Moana 2 to make sure that I could at least, I'm to the point now where I don't mind. I'll let my kids watch stuff because I know I can have a good conversation with them afterwards. So in particular, I like doing movies and plays and things like this because that's, it's our shared entertainment. But in Moana 2, the bat lady who lives in the giant clam, sorry for spoilers, but it's been out for a while. So hopefully I'm not ruining Moana 2 for everybody. But the bat lady is saying, in order to find your way out of the dungeon, or, basically they're in a prison. In order to find their way out, they have to get lost, and I always talk about this with my kids. And the reason I bring this up is because it's one of the theatrical musical numbers in the movie. And when in our modern culture, particularly in the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, we were told that if we abandon the idea of traditional marriage, we're give way to no fault divorce, the kids are resilient, they're going to be fine, they're going to move forward. And obviously that didn't pan out very well. It's like God had something in mind when he said, get married and stay married. But I digress. The lady says, maybe you have to get lost a little bit. And okay, well, that works if you're doing a business venture and maybe you go do something unorthodox in a business sense. It's not illegal. It's not against the laws of God or man, but you're going to do something kind of outside of the norm. Well, a lot of times, in an entrepreneurial sense, that's very, very good. But in the world of relativism, everything is equal in the sense that everything is everything and nothing all at the same time. And so the idea that's being propagated by that song is everything's on the table. So you can try a different corridor in the prison to get out, or maybe you could just do something that someone else thinks is morally questionable, but who's to say? There is no truth. And so that was a good conversation with my kids as far as saying, like, hey, where do you draw the line? Obviously that applies to certain things. It's not a truism, though. And really, practically speaking, that's what we see politically speaking. People take a particular example and try to bring it to the universal. We see that in the pro-choice, pro-life argument. We see, well, what about so-and-so? What about 0.01% of the population? If we pass this pro-life law, it's going to affect them. Okay, let's make a law for them too. The idea that we're going to make something universally true to protect an extreme minority of cases. And so you see it in that way in policy. And then you also see it on the flip side, like in things like the climate change argument. They're going to talk about this existential crisis, and you wouldn't dare disagree and go against the fray, and so in different ways, when you're looking at something, that's the best way to see it practically for relativism. Is what is their argument? Are they trying to give me a truism, right? Are they trying to say this is absolutely true every single time? And to vet that, to question that, is it actually true? And then obviously the reverse is true. If someone's giving vagaries and saying, well, we can't call it true because of this circumstance or that circumstance, again, we have to vet that and say, but usually when people are expanding to universals or trying to expand particulars to universals, I hope that's tracking. But generally, the best way to say it is the person is always trying to get to a point. The person is using their rhetoric and using their words, and they want to arrive at a certain destination. And the question is, what is that destination? And can we judge that as being something that's good or bad? So
I've seen that. A couple of areas where I've seen that is, for one, and correct me if I'm not understanding, but I think what I think you're trying to say is, one, you see clear hypocrisy. They'll say one thing and it applies to one situation, but it doesn't apply to other. And a perfect example of that actually goes back to, again, around that same age. And maybe that's why this particular issue is so deeply important to me, because it was at a transformative time of my life that I had this like epiphany about this issue of relativism. The issue of the abortion argument was being, of course, was a big deal back even when I was in high school. And I'll never forget, because my Catholic friends were dead set against it. And I was a newly converted Protestant. And I remember my attitude about it was, well, it's not really my role to say anything as a man. And so that was how I dealt with it before. So I just ignored it, didn't think about it at all. And if somebody asked me, I'm like, well, I'm not a woman, so it's not my decision. But that totally negates the fact that any child is created by both a man and a woman. And so there is some personal responsibility there for the man. But then after I became a Christian, I said, okay, yes, abortion is wrong. But I left in that caveat of, except for in the cases of rape and incest. And I'll never forget, because my stepmother, who she's now a strong conservative Christian, but at the time she wasn't. And she challenged me on that. And she said, how can you say that? She was pro-choice. And she said, how can you say that? That she goes, you're either one way or the other. You either believe that it's a life or you don't. You can't say that it's only a life when it was conceived, in an appropriate way. But if it's conceived in some way that's not appropriate, then all of a sudden it's not a life. And I thought about that. And I thought about it, and I kind of tried to take a step back, and I created a scenario in my head. Okay, let's say that somebody raped a woman. And you could not find that man who was the rapist. Would you then go find his son and punish the son for the crime of the father? And when I thought about it that way, it was a resounding no, of course not. And so it became an obvious answer to that question. And I think the argument that gets made too often when it comes to things like that, or whether it comes to anything else really, where they try to push this kind of agenda, is that they are making their argument from the standpoint of somebody's emotions. They're making an emotional argument, or a pathos argument is what I've heard is it's called. But and that is always a warning sign, And it can be a warning sign even for us too, when we're trying to make an argument. We got to really examine, our arguments, so that our arguments are based on facts and logic, and not just simply emotions and raw emotions, because obviously in the end that will get dismantled by somebody who's using logic. So I think that that this issue is an important one, like I said, for this generation especially. And I'm glad that you brought up about your kids. My wife and I, we were just watching a show tonight, and it seemed like, oh, this would be a great movie. It's PG. It seemed interesting. And it was a movie called, I think it was called, what was it? The House with the Clock on the Wall, or something like that, with Jack Black. And it seemed like it was going to be a great movie, and then get into it, and it's like all about witchcraft, and it's for kids. And it's basically like, it's not like mild witchcraft. Like, I would say like Harry Potter is kind of like so fantasy that it's like, one could argue that that's, not too dangerous, especially if you're teaching your kids about reality versus fantasy. But in this movie, it's more based in like modern reality, and he's actually teaching them about warlocks and spells. And and as a Christian, now my kids are all grown, but was watching this, I'm going, I can't believe that this is being sold to young kids. How many parents put this on thinking that this would be safe for their kids and then walk away and have no idea that this is leading their children down the path of experimenting with witchcraft? And I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So there really is this Hollywood, I think, is probably one of the biggest, reinforcers, if you will, of these types of tactics to manipulate and transform our values and transform our definitions of words, even, and our meanings of things and understanding of reality. What have you noticed about that in regards to, like, what role does the media play in reinforcing these tactics?
Well, they do play a very, very important role. It's the shared, Hollywood is the shared entertainment of America. And so I talk about Hollywood in the book, and just saying that this is Hollywood is the land of make-believe, but in any sense that it affects our culture and our society, it's that which we ought to dream about, or that which we ought to vaunt and hold up as the make-believe that we want. And you see that time and time again. The witchcraft is a really good example. In every rom-com, right? They're doing everything wrong.
Yep.
And then, in almost every TV show, it's just a remake of the Friends series. How I Met Your Mother is very similar, and it's just a group of people who end up sleeping with everybody, and you have to be wise and woke enough to, like, get beyond yourself and your mores, your cultural mores, and then that's how you live out true liberality and freedom. And of course, now we're 2 generations deep into being addicted and having ubiquitous online porn and a huge problem with our sexuality. We're really slaves to it.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, you have to see, ultimately, your ultimate decoder, if you will, is to say, especially in Hollywood, you look at and read and see media and you say, where is this leading me? What is this leading me to believe is right? What is this leading me to believe is maybe beyond my morals, but if I just get intellectual or, let down my guard enough, I'm going to get to a sense of happiness. That's exactly what they're doing, is they're selling this hedonistic idea and the idea of relativism as the true sense of human liberality. And of course, we have centuries and centuries of Western antiquity, going even back to Aristotle, who was certainly not a Christian, talking about the discipline of the will and orienting yourself toward the concept of the good. You're already wanting good things for yourself and your family, but if you don't harness those and understand how you can discipline that towards good ends, you're destined to fail. You're at least destined to fall short, if not go down a different path, pursuing things that you think are good, but are actually going to lead to your detriment and harm.
Yeah.
So
now your book talks a lot about, I think, the forces that are at play behind a lot of this, whether it is the massive just LGBTQ plus IA, whatever you want to call it, alphabet soup, intersectionalism, all of the push on global climate change stuff, which is hilarious because, out of one side of their mouth, they're talking and lecturing us about not driving, gas guzzling cars. And then they're flying their private jets, to these conferences to talk about it, expelling all kinds of carbon. And now you've got, just 5 years ago, everybody loved Elon Musk and was all about buying a Tesla. And now they're burning down Teslas. So it just goes to show they really don't care about the climate. It's never been about the climate. It's all about politics. And that's what it's about for them. It's about power and using whatever manipulation tactic they can use. But who are the real people that are behind all this?
The people that are behind this, I call them the inapparent kings of America, and more collectively, the thrones of Davos. But I say the part 2 about wanting to be inapparent kings because they don't want to sit on a king and be called Lord so and so. They want to continue to remain in the shadows. And so if you say those people's names on a live stream, even like this, you're going to get pinged for it. So, but needless to say, it's very hard to find this information, but you can find it, or you can just buy a copy of the book. I've got a URL in there with their names. But it is the people who have been established wealth for several generations. They're not going to be the people who are gracing Forbes on the world's richest people list. It's an even more elite and wealthier cabal than that. They're the people who own the private banks, mostly in Europe, that underwrite the Federal Reserve and the International Monetary Fund. And so that's the source of their wealth. They finance the Fortune 500. They finance most banks. Most likely your bank is just an extension of basically when I say they're private banks that underwrite these things, that just means that they have hoards of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. And it's that wealth that legitimizes the other financial institutions.
Do you think that these folks believe what they're selling, or do you think it's just a tactic to keep us all, dumb and fighting each other and distracted, while they basically continue to, take more and more ownership of the world?
Well, they do at the most distilled level. They are true relativists in the sense that they throw off morals. They throw off the idea and the concept of God. They do believe at this point they're demigods on this earth, and they have every right to control and manipulate people to whatever degree that they can for their own power. Now that looks different in the different striations of power moving down. But I will say this. Anybody who's lived in a system of abuse will understand that relativism in a very unique way. And that is somebody who is abusing someone else. Their actions are going to seem very, if you just took a snapshot from day to day, you may see very different actions. You may see the abusive husband buying flowers one day, begging them to stay. And the next day you're going to see some abuse. And the next day you're going to see some manipulation. And so even though the actions all seem contradictory, the whole premise behind all of the actions that an abuser is going to take is to uphold and maintain the system of abuse. As long as you can keep people trapped in the system of abuse, you can still be the abuser, right? So that's the system. And if you kind of get outside of the fray and really look at it that way, the different policy points, what they're selling to us, which they would never do themselves, like eating the bugs, these things begin to make sense. And so it really is a system where they need to eradicate the middle class throughout the West and anywhere it exists. So they use communism as a political tactic in that arena. They use their immense amount of financial holdings in the economy to twist the knobs and levers of power to get things to move the way they want to. And certainly they have control of both Hollywood and the legacy media in order to spin certain stories. And so I think you get to a level where just say the news reporter. I think the news reporter on CNN knows that they're lying, but you don't get to sit in that chair unless you do. And so you have to be a person of a certain moral character or lack thereof to do that. And that goes to Hollywood, celebrities, all the celebrities that post the square and fly the flag and do the thing. But really the inner circle of people, it's just their system of abuse, and they're giving everyone carrots and sticks to stay in it. And as long as they can stay behind the scenes and keep that snowball rolling down the hill, they'll achieve their ends. And so Donald Trump's a fly in the ointment. All of these nation sovereignty movements are a big fly in that ointment. And so we got to the point where we're starting to see them say the quiet parts out loud, but it'll be very interesting in the next few years to see what different manipulation tactics come out. And then ultimately what the ultimate reveal is that leads us into the great reset that they're envisioning to upend the world order for good.
Now, The Great Reset, that's another book that I've been reading about, is Klaus Schwab's book. It's Good to Know Thy Enemy. And so I've been reading his book about the industrial, was it the
Fourth Industrial
Industrial
Revolution.
Revolution? Yeah. This man's a sick man. I mean, it's just the hubris that these people have.
Don't whitewash it now.
What's that? Oh, yeah.
Don't whitewash it now.
Yeah, no, I mean, they really do have I think like a collective mental illness. For one, they have no fear of God. They don't believe in God.
Mm-hmm.
They are God, and in their mind, and so I don't trust anybody, quite honestly, that does not have I'm okay with an agnostic saying, I don't know if there's a God or not, or I don't, if there is a God, I don't know him. That to me is at least some level of humility. But somebody that just says there is no God, I have zero trust in them. And I immediately am suspicious, because I understand the importance of the concept that I know that someday I'm going to stand before my maker and be held accountable for the things that I've done in this world. And if I did not have that, if I had no threat of that at all, coupled with, and this is the key, because there's a lot of atheists that maybe, they don't have power. So for them, they have to behave in a good way so that they can actually get along with their neighbor, right? But the ultra rich elites, they don't have to behave in any sort of way to get along with people, because they have enough power to squash you. And so when you take that and you couple that with zero belief in God, it is an extremely dangerous thing. And to me, it is a combination from hell. I do think that there is something, from a spiritual perspective, I do think that there is almost like a demonic pathology, if you will, with these people. Yep. You see it because they move into these things, they push for these things that clearly are antichrist type ideologies, right?
Exactly.
And it's been going on for, since time immemorial, right? You go all the way back to the Ancient of Days, and, and they were sacrificing babies, and to Moloch, and the king was making people bow down to worship his idol and all of that. So it's no different today, than it was back then. Except now they do it a little bit more behind closed doors. Although it seems in the last 4 or 5 years, they've kind of cast off whatever public restraint that they had. They've cast it off, and they've moved into the public sphere to shove it all in our faces and cram it down our throats, that this is the new world and we better learn to live in it. What are your thoughts about this, and how do we counter this?
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head there with it being a demonic ideology. And this is why when you throw truth out, when you throw any concept of truth, beauty, or goodness, and certainly God out the window, there's only two places to go. In the book I say, in the metaphysical world, there are only two points of orbit. You either orbit around God, and this is why relativism, it is the devil's theology. And I describe it as the devil has his back turned to his followers because he's facing the same direction they are. And they're worshiping this thing that's as close to an anti-God as it can be, just throwing everything away. And practically speaking, it is the worship of the uninhibited self. I'm going to throw everything away. I'm going to do what pleases me. And I'm going to do that to the infinite degree. Yeah. So it really does, and it does lend itself to going down that pathway and ending up in really, really dark places. And that is something to me that is a huge signpost of why I see that this is foisted on us. We're sold it as convenience. We're sold it as true liberality. It makes us poorer. It makes us sadder. It makes us more depressed and anxious. And so when you see that this is being used and manipulated on purpose by the way, by people exactly to your point, who are so wealthy that they're insulated from any,
Right.
they're insulated from any harm that they cause to themselves or others because of living this ideology out.
Yeah.
The way that we can battle this is to reclaim that Western heritage, to come back to and realize that we were sold this idea that it was uncool to believe in God, and hey, maybe that's a lie, but rediscovering that common humanity through the rational belief in God. I'd love to see a spiritual revival and see a lot of more people turn to God in a religious sense.
Mhm.
But I've said for years, this country, even before we can get to that spiritual revival, we need a philosophical revolution. We need to reclaim this Western heritage that's been stolen from us, and get back to Aristotle's unmoved mover. Reclaim the capital T truth. There is a truth. There are things that are good and there are things that are bad, and we're going to hold our society and our elected officials accountable to that. So
Yeah.
I hope that I'm a part of part of driving the narrative away from the globalism, away from the relativism, and back to that and being a part of the conversation.
Why do you think it is that it seems that collectivism is always a part of the equation?
Mhm.
And I think probably it has something to do with, in order to be able to control the masses, right? You need them under some sort of level of authoritarianism. And we saw that in just spades with the whole COVID thing.
Oh yeah.
Can you get into that a little bit and tell me about how collectivism, plays into that, and why is, like, everywhere we go, so whether it's socialism, whether it is fascism, whether it is America's weird quasi-socialism that exists, and this amalgamation of public-private partnership garbage, USAID, it's always about collectivism. And why
Mhm.
is that? And why should that, and how do we utilize that knowledge that is always part of the equation to kind of give us maybe a warning sign of something that might be coming?
Yeah, it's by design, but it's also no mistake and makes perfect sense that the godless commies would find common core with relativists, and it rests on the same theology. It rests on this idea that we can have equality of outcome. So it really preaches to the basest will and desire of mankind, and it's really hard to unseat. Uh, One of the things that I talk about in the book is why there can be no communist government, why there truly in practice can be no communist government. And it's because the second that you put up the hierarchy of government over a country, you have destroyed the basic concept that we're all going to hold all things in common. And so what you end up having is a tyrant preaching communism for the sake of their power over the people. And I challenge people a lot, and I say, you can call our tyrant in America the tyrant of wokeism or liberalism, use whatever term you want. But we've built this giant regulatory state that it functions just like Stalin's oligarchy.
Mm.
It rules us from on high in Washington, D.C. The Congress has derelicted all of their lawmaking duty into them. And so, as the fourth branch of government, you tell me how that is not functionarily any different than a communist regime like Mao's China or Stalin's Russia. It's exactly the same. And so the reason that communism is being foisted on the West is because these elites in Davos, they are going to do what Stalin wasn't capable of, what Mao wasn't capable of, and that is to see the revolution through to the end. And so that is to bring about the global communist movement. But what they get out of it is they control the politicians through the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders initiative.
Yeah, that's
So
how
they, yeah,
the Prime Minister of Canada, right? That was one of the things
yeah,
that Klaus Schwab was bragging about, was that they had infiltrated the Canadian Prime Ministership and all these other countries around the world. They had gotten their guys
mhm,
in there. We see that with George Soros and these DAs that don't
right,
believe in the law. that have taken over, and these, low, and very, very smart, ingenious tactic, I will say, because
Right.
no one pays attention to the low level races. How many people can you tell me that know who their prosecutor is, or know, most people don't even know who their local, representative is, let alone their local prosecutor. And so it's a
Right.
race that oftentimes people just, they'll put down whatever name they saw a flyer for, or saw a billboard or a commercial for, and that's about it. They really will vote ignorantly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and or they just vote because of the letter next to the person's name, And
yeah,
so,
yeah.
admittedly, I do that. I do that more than I should. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, I look at it as like,
yeah.
it's like a stopgap measure,
Yeah.
Like, I'll be honest with you, like, school board's one of the ones that's like really hard, because in our state it's a they call it a what do they say? It's a non-partisan position, which I disagree. I don't think there is such a thing as nonpartisan anymore. And in fact, I
Right.
want them to make the school board partisan, because at least I know what the platform is of the Republican Party, and I can hold them to that. And at least I can
Mhm.
hold, our party officials responsible if they endorse some candidate that, is not with with the party platform. But it's really hard to know on some of these, like with judges and with, these school board members. So one of the ways that I used to figure it out was, they had this thing called the Apple that was produced. It was a voting guide produced by the National Education Association. And I would open that up, and whoever they endorsed, I made sure not to vote for them.
That's pretty good policy.
And if they had somebody, if there was somebody on the list that was not in their book, then I knew that would probably, they were safer to vote for than anybody that they had listed. So
Yeah.
but it's crazy, what we're dealing with. And I think what we've found out so far, and I want to shift our conversation a little bit now more towards politics and what's going on today, because what we are finding out with Doge and them exposing this USAID, transfer of wealth from the people, from us,
Mhm.
basically taking our money. And it's like they might as well be taking our money and buying brass and lead and casting bullets to shoot us with. I mean, that's really what this
Yeah.
looks like. They've been taking our own dollars, our own tax dollars, and they have been funneling it into organizations to destroy our Western values and culture. And not just here, but exporting it around the world. And I do believe that there is some money laundering going on here, where there are probably some fake things that aren't actually, the money's not going towards that, but instead it's being
Mhm.
funneled into, various, back into, political hands, or even maybe even some of these wealthy individuals. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I had made a meme a while back that I post every so often, but just exactly to your point, they take our tax dollars, they throw it into the regulatory agencies. The regulatory agencies follow international agreements and what sounds good on the international stage. The
Mm-hmm.
money flows out to everyone who's willing to erode Western values, and then the cycle repeats again. And the short version of it is you're funding your own enslavement.
Yeah.
And with the USAID fraud, you can see the groups who are willing to push forward that globalist agenda, or the liberal agenda, the agenda of relativism, of hedonism more broadly, and abandoning Western values. Those are the ones who get the grant money. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
and that's orchestrated as well.
yeah, and that is without any doubt, that is the current flavor of the year, or flavor of the decade, if you will, for these globalists, right? But I've been looking through and reading. I like I said, I had this guest on the other night, and we were talking about this document that was compiled by Deputy Director Crowley former deputy director of the CIA, and he outlines the details of the assassination plot against JFK and RFK. And what's amazing about it, and he has all the intercepts from the NSA, has all the conversations and who was on those calls and who was in those communications. I mean, it's like he wrote clearly he was writing a CYA document that probably had a dead man switch on it, that if somebody assassinated him for his part in it, because he was one of the organizers of it, then everybody would get exposed. But when he died, that document got sent to somebody and it got published in a book. And the CIA went out and tried to buy all those books up so that it wouldn't become public. And so there's very few of those books that are out there in circulation. And I think the guy that I had interviewed, he paid like $500 for this hardbound version of it. But the Appendix A has been removed from all the other later editions. And that's where that top secret document was. And it details it all. I mean, what was amazing in it, what blew my mind, was the guy who was really behind a lot of this was this guy, Alan Dulles. And the thing about him that's fascinating is his brother was Secretary of State for Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, on his farewell address, right, he tries to warn the American people about the military-industrial complex. And what comes out in this letter is the series of conversations. And one of the and this was compiled after the assassination, but it was like right after they had just installed LBJ and put him in there. And what you see is this conversation happen about how the Joint Chiefs of Staff, they want to go to war with Russia. They wanted to go to war with Cuba. They wanted to go to war with the communists. Not because they hate communists. They just wanted to go to war, I think, because it makes them money and it keeps them in power. And I think, it's really like an amoral type of attitude. It's kind of like, George Soros talks about, he's Jewish, right? Ethnically. Right. And yet he worked with the Nazis, to go and identify Jews during World War II. And he talks about it openly. And he doesn't seem to have any kind of guilt about it at all, or he doesn't feel bad about it. He says, no, I had to, it was more beneficial for me to do that. He is the completely amoral sociopath. And that is what I see in a lot of these, people, is that it doesn't matter whether you're on the right, whether they're pushing things on the right or pushing things on the left. And I say the right, but really the so-called right, because it's not even really the values that it's not conservative values by any means. But they would seek to push us into war, or they would seek to, push us into economic destruction with, climate change nonsense. They don't care. It's not about pushing an agenda for the sake of that agenda. It's about pushing that agenda for the sake of causing, the utmost disruption, to our liberties and our freedoms and our ability to, know right from wrong and choose, and determine our destiny. Because like you said, they want to be seated on those thrones of Davos. And there's a question that I have in the chat, and I want to ask you about this because I think you might have some knowledge on this. I'm going to bring it up here because I've heard people talk about this, but I am not as familiar with it. I mean, I know of some of these, there's, and it has to do with, the families that are basically kind of running things and in control. Let me see if I can find that. Oh, I think it already passed. Oh, wait, there it is down here. Let's see. It's about here it is. Okay, so I brought it up on the screen there. So I've heard a lot of people talk about this, and when I see this, I don't really know about it. I mean, obviously there's so much conspiracy and, and I use this term lightly, conspiracy theory, because quite honestly, if you'd asked me 10 years ago about some conspiracy theories, that now we found out are not theories, they're actual facts. So I'm a little bit more open to, I'm always kind of a skeptic, but I'm a little more open to the idea that maybe there's some truth to some of these things. And, but I think about Europe and the monarchies. They were a bunch of families that ruled. And when the monarchies got deposed, and they didn't go away, they just became, they created a House of Commons so that, the people could, at least have a voice. And they created parliaments and this parliamentarian system and all of that. But the monarchies did not necessarily go away. And so I wonder, and then you have, of course, like the Rockefellers, right? And they have had a massive influence in a lot of this woke stuff. And like, it's funny because I think like JD Rockefeller, I don't think was anything like his children and grandchildren in terms of their ideologies, but that mental illness of megalomania certainly was there, right? And that seems to have been passed down, to them. Now they are in control, but now they're pushing a woke agenda, where he was really pushing more of like a corporatism dominance, right? The Gilded Age. What do you know about this, and what can you tell us about, about this? Do these people actually look for bloodlines, or is there a set of families, or are people like Elon Musk not part of it because they're not part of the bloodlines, even though he's filthy rich? Or do we have to worry about that too? I mean, like, how do we identify these people?
Yeah, well, just on a previous point, I always say it doesn't make me a theorist for merely observing your conspiracy.
That reminds me of the saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yeah, that's right. But you're right. You can go down a lot of rabbit holes, a lot of different directions. The 13 bloodlines I've seen, I think there is some legitimacy to some of the things that are said there. The Rockefellers are kind of the new money, which is kind of hard to believe. They're trillionaires and they're the new money. But this did start with a couple of different families that have been in banking and banking institutions for a long time. One of the things, and I don't want to cause too much flurry in the comment section, but I say that things like, particularly in the QAnon conspiracy, that lead you down some very dark rabbit holes. And I'm going to compare this back to this tale of the 13 bloodlines. Remember that you're dealing with people who will look you dead in the eye and tell you whatever they think that you need to hear for them to get their way. Right. And so if they feel like they can tie themselves back to some ancestral bloodline, of course they're going to do it. And in the QAnon side, if they can sell such an outlandish story, whether it's true or not, whether the sacrifices and demonology and all of the stuff is true, they're going to trot out this almost unbelievable thing to obfuscate and hide the fact, because the QAnon conspiracy says two things. There's a cabal of very wealthy people controlling the world, and there are a bunch of weird wizard warlock type people who sacrifice children.
Yeah.
Well, and you're like,
the funny thing about it is they're definitely not wrong on the first part,
right?
And on the second part, some of them probably are,
Yeah. But see, you tell that to just a regular everyday person who's not clued in on the street.
Sure.
They're going to walk away thinking about the ordering pizzas and hot dogs at the White House and how crazy you are, and totally negate the first very true aspect of that theory.
Right.
And so I do think that you're dealing with generational wealth. You obviously can't get away from that particular aspect of it. Whether that's just counterintelligence or tangential conspiracy theory, and you're actually dealing with people who are going to demand the you draw a DNA test to get into Bohemian Grove or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a member, so I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. One thing I do think that there is some what you said was kind of interesting, right? Is that some people may actually go ahead and go along with that, that conspiracy, right, in order to promote the fear of them, or the and you see, where I see this is I see it in Hollywood. You see all these guys, they'll do this, and
Yes.
they'll do the Illuminati, the symbol or whatever. I don't think any of these people are really in any kind of Illuminati. I think they're just
Right.
messing with people. But I do think that they are, on a spiritual level, they are, I think, demoniacs. I think I do think that there is something about these people selling their soul. I don't think it's like the movies. I don't think the devil shows up and goes, "Oh, hey, sign this contract right here." But I do think that they sell their soul, and I think it's a human. I think probably every human being has some point in their life where they know that what they're about to do is wrong, and they have some warning that says, "Don't do this." Their conscience, whatever, and they see dollars, and they say, "You know what? I'm going to do it anyways." And when they do that, that is selling their soul. And I think they give a piece of their will over to the devil, and it gives a stronghold. And every time they do that, it goes more and more and more and more over. You see this in Hollywood, I think, because of the amounts of money that get thrown at these people. I think it happens with sports figures. I think it happens with politicians. Man, how many politicians do you know that have gone down to Washington, D.C.? We voted for them, and maybe we even knew them personally, helped with their campaigns. They get down there, and it's like they get totally corrupted. And they will say one thing out of one side of their face to the public, but then they'll vote a totally different way. And it's like, what in the hell happened to these people? And I do think there's something about that. I think, there's got to be, there has to be some sort of I guess it's like a Faustian bargain, basically. They're basically, is what's going on.
Yeah, that is, just to riff off of that for a little bit, you're speaking the truth, man. Preach. But when you're exactly right in the decision-making process, and it clouds the will and it reshapes you. And people always say all the time, this is, if you're talking about this grand conspiracy theory, everybody'd have to be in on it. You'd have whistleblowers, you'd have this, you'd have that. And what you just laid out is the perfect example of what pulls together the quote unquote conspiracy is a conspiracy of similar ideologies.
Yeah.
They're clouding themselves around that same core focus. And the movie star who grew up dirt poor, maybe in some rural town, and goes to Hollywood and makes hundreds of millions of dollars and is more wealthy than most people, that's more than they would have ever imagined in success in their life. So they're not going to try to upscale and go get in the political arena or try to rival their globalist overlords. They're totally happy, and they know that their entire career rests on them doing what they're told by their agent and by Hollywood and selling the narrative. And so it's not like everybody's in on it. Everybody goes to the secret cabal meetings and all of these things. It's just, it's a collective interest that's brought together by a central ideology that they've sold themselves out to.
Yeah. And I think, like, even when you see, like, let's just take the P. Diddy thing, for example. I think Epstein Island was a different thing. I think that there was actually an intelligence community operation going on, and there in order to blackmail people. I'm not so sure that's what's going on with P. Diddy, but maybe, who knows? But I do think that when you have one person who is doing things that they know that if one person is debasing themselves, I remember seeing this in high school, right? Even as an adult in the Army, one guy, goes out and debases himself. He doesn't feel comfortable doing that if he's the only one doing it, because he knows in his heart of hearts that he's wrong. And so he tries to get everybody he knows to partake in his sin, right? This is a part of human nature. What do they call that when you believe something but you act in a different way and it causes what is that called?
Cognitive dissonance.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it. Cognitive dissonance. I think that is a real thing that these people experience, and so their only way of coping with it, right, is to make excuses for themselves. And the best way to do that is get everybody else involved in your sin, and then that way you can basically turn it into the new normal, even though there is no such thing. There's truth, and then there's the opposite of truth. But they try to move the goalposts so that they can feel like, okay, I'm kicking the field goal like far to the left. So, maybe that's how they justify it, is by moving those goalposts over to the left so that they can feel like, it's some level of normalcy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a difference in kind, certainly. And with the Hollywood ring, it's much more about indoctrination, bringing you to a certain level of debasement where they maybe have some dirt on you, but it's to prove your allegiance.
Right.
Because ultimately those people are their prophets. The celebrities come out and tell you who to vote for. They tell you which climate initiatives to support. They serve a very important function.
Yeah. And again, speaking of how we know that what they're saying is bullshit, is when you got the very people. There was a great video that came out. I think it was during Trump's first campaign. They had all of these Hollywood stars that come out, and they're all talking about, oh no, it was that's where it was. It was during like the Parkland shooting or whatever. All these Hollywood stars come out and they're all, guns are bad, all da 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 da. And somebody took that same video and they put cuts in between of those same actors in violent behavior in their movies, shooting and killing people, and like in gratuitous ways. And I was just like, oh, this is beautiful. Like, show the hypocrisy, to the whole world, because these people are the biggest hypocrites. They're going to lecture us on gun violence, and then they go out and promote it in their movies.
Yeah, absolutely. So the wrong person to count on for authenticity is somebody who plays other people on camera for a living.
That's a very good point. that's like stating the obvious, but it's obvious, but it's not obvious. But you're right. Actors are probably not the people that people who are pretending to be other people are probably not the people that you want to be looking to for authenticity. So, wow. So when you look at Trump's, going back to Doge and what they've been exposing and all of this money laundering that's been going on and funneling, other things have been popping up too. And there was something that just to talk about this, because it came out in the news, it's been talked about all day, is, this new Signalgate thing. And, can you break that down and what exactly it is, and why is it significant in the larger picture of globalist tactics?
Yeah. So the Signalgate thing has come out. Apparently a journalist from The Atlantic was included in a Signal chat where Pete Hegseth, among other top military officials from the Pentagon, were discussing bombing the Houthis in Yemen. And I really don't know exactly what was going on there. I'd like to think that they invited him onto this thing on purpose, just to make him print this article so that we can do the spin cycle and show how dumb these people are. I don't know that to be a fact, but it
does seem like kind of like a juvenile mistake, like something that, come on, really?
Yeah. And so he's privy to some communique between different Pentagon officials about what they're going to do. To me, the biggest red flag is this conversation is taking place hours before the actual bombing. And so, to me, maybe if China puts an aircraft carrier at the at the port of entry in San Francisco. We may have only mere hours to act. This is obviously a very controlled situation. They're going to have this conversation and say the bombing is going to happen next Tuesday. They're not really just shaking their fingers about what they're going to do in the next 2 hours. And then the second part of it is he comes out very bombastically and says, I was on this secret signal channel and heard I heard these war plans. And then as the conversations have come out, there's no intelligence whatsoever to be garnered from it. And the media is not selling it as then, oh, here's the first batch of information. We're going to slow leak it out. So there's obviously nothing there.
Yeah.
But again, the thing that I say in the book again and again is we're dealing with people who are using any tactic, any means necessary to get what they want. And what they're trying to do is tarnish Pete Hegseth. They're trying to muddy the waters with the Trump administration. And this is just a punch. They feel like we're in a 15-round boxing match, and this is our level of haymakers for round 3,
Right. And I mean, that is the other thing too, is it seems to me that if there's any silver lining or light at the end of the tunnel that I see, it's that the Democrat Party and really, the left in general are losing credibility every single day. They are bleeding voters, hence why they have to have open borders to get illegal aliens in here. Not because I don't honestly think that they get these illegal aliens to vote. I think they're just getting them to register to vote so they can actually mail in fake ballots with those people's names on it. This is the evidence that I've seen working on election integrity stuff that I've done quite a bit of work on. So they are trying to find any which way they can to stay in power. They're losing power. I do have concerns about our youth in particular, because I don't think we're moving fast enough to although I think Trump's moves to dismantle the Department of Education, I think, is a very wise decision, because at a minimum, it protects the conservative states. When they get control back in their schools, they can begin to do things differently. But until we deal with the NEA and the Federation of American or was it the Federation of Teachers of America, I don't know, FTA or whatever the two unions basically that control our education system, until those are dismantled, I think we still are we have major threat. But we've got to get control over the curriculum and stop this woke nonsense from being, our children from being indoctrinated. And to me, the easiest ways to do that are to dismantle the Department of Education and get the states, encourage our states to move to a voucher system so that parents can choose what schools they want to put their kids in, and the money follows the kid. That, to me, I think has the greatest chance of being able to save this generation from being polluted by, that kind of woke nonsense being, pushed by the globalists. What say you?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And one of the things that I'm a older millennial, and one of the things that I really saw is as a disconnect between myself and my parents' generation was we were the first generation to grow up with MTV, just like a completely different radical shift into reality TV and things like that. But everyone knew that reality TV was fake. This was the age of doing billions of dollars in psychological research for advertising. And so I say this is kind of a meta concept, is we were a generation that realized that things were just being sold to us. We weren't a part of this common collective, and we were all moving in the same direction. It was like corporations are selling things to you, whether you need them or not. They just want your money. And so there was a level of consumerism and the pitfalls that go with that. And if I see anything in Gen Z and younger generations, they're even more jaded about that. And it's something that is why they talk about Gen Z being much more conservative. And so, whereas I feel like, don't want to make a generational war here, but, anybody that's 40 and younger really struggle. We still struggle with different things, particularly technological advances and conveniences, where we're like, well, we grew up without them, and then we got to experience them as young adults. And it's really hard to put the phone down. It's hard to be disciplined and do that.
It's even harder for my generation, Generation X, because we look at, like, I don't even, like, if it hadn't been for my wife informing me, about things that my kids were going through, because I was working and not paying attention, and our kids got cell phones at a young age because we lived in Japan and we wanted to know we could get a hold of them anytime because they took the trains everywhere. And we get back here, and so they grew up with a whole level of connectedness to the internet that I never had until, like, I was in college. And then even still, now my career, I've been in cybersecurity for 27 years, so I'm a little bit more technologically connected than most. And now with with doing a show, I have to be on all the social media and everything, but I can turn it off and it don't bother me,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's a different story for the younger generations. And and I am concerned that that knowledge gap between generations, right? The technology is advancing so quickly, the parents can't even keep up with what their kids are experiencing.
Right.
And I worry about, like, the advent of AI and like you mentioned, the pornography that's just so prevalent and available. And it's not like the pornography that I had as a kid, right? The pornography I had as a kid, at worst, you had basic sexual activity going on, but it wasn't like now there's some stuff that is so far off the reservation.
Oh yeah.
That back in the day, even just 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you would have had to have, like, known how to get on the dark web to get some of the stuff. And nowadays you don't even need to do that to get to it. And so kids are being exposed to things that should never, like, I don't understand how we went from having obscenity laws. Like, what the hell good are they if they're not going to enforce them? And so I don't understand why they don't have, at least some modicum of law when it comes to this, because children are being exposed.
Yeah. It's we're beat down into fearing the backlash. We're afraid of the social backlash.
Yeah.
If we come and try to be nanny state, but again, that's our enemy speaking that argument and those words into the conversation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I do think.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, to put a bow on that, I think Gen Z is even more aware that we, quote unquote, live in a simulation, that things are being sold to us. And now we're to the point where it's obvious they're selling ideology and ideas to us. And so as much as I completely agree with you that we stand at the precipice, we're kind of at a breaking point and a brink, but I do think that Gen Z particularly is primed to, if someone's willing to be honest with them and tell them the truth, for them to embrace that wholeheartedly and come back around. But we got to get to that point.
Yeah. So as a philosopher, you mentioned about the simulation. And so I'm really curious on your thoughts on this. I found the movie The Matrix to be fascinating. Like, it was just, to me, eye-opening. And what was really fascinating about it to me was that I sat in on a couple of classes that my wife was taking back when we were dating in college. And she had a philosophy class that she had to go to as part of her general ed. And so I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went and sat in on it. And I remember her professor making this, and this was long before the movie The Matrix came out, but her professor talked about, basically asked the class if there was a machine that you could be hooked up to, and you could be hooked up to this machine and not have to live in reality, but it would create a fake reality that was perfect. Or you could be aware of what's really going on, but you might have to have the discomfort of suffering. Which would you rather have? And the majority of the class wanted to be hooked up to the machine. There was only a few people in the room, myself included, were like, hell no, I'd rather, be tortured and know what's really going on than have my reality distorted. And and that was very alarming to me. And then the movie The Matrix came out, like maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later. And that's basically what that movie's about. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that, and what do you think the implications are for, what are your thoughts on, because I guess that at that time that would have been probably like the millennial generation that was in that class primarily, maybe some of the X generation as well. But what do you think is the reality that we're facing now with today's younger generations? Do you think that's shifting?
I do think it's shifting, and I think that being closer to it and seeing the realities and the pitfalls of it, we're probably still in a place where a majority of people are gonna, if given the option, are going to strap on the VR headset and go get in the pod and eat the bugs, but that is truly like it's obviously a meme, but that is the reality that we're being sold by these globalists, our would-be overlords, in saying you'll live in a 15-minute city and you won't be able to travel anywhere. But like I said, just being close to it and maybe having somebody tell you that ultimately they're going to have to tell us that is how you're going to live. That's my fight. That's why I wrote the book, and that I speak out is like I do, is because I want to know that there are at least a few of us that are going to continue to fight. And like I said, I think really reaching out to those younger generations, saying, because right now, to be a radical is to go get traditionally married and raise kids and have some chickens. And so, hey man, let's go be radicals. That's my thinking is
counterculture counterculture is now what traditional, culture was back in, our parents' day and even some of our, at least in my day. So that brings me to I guess a good way to kind of wrap up our talk here. I haven't gotten to the end of your book yet, but I'm really curious, like, what calls for action do you have for everyday Americans that we can do to stay informed, to resist manipulation and protect our communities from these types of threats by these, globalists, kings of Davos that want to rule over us? How do we fight back? And I want to ask this, and I hope the answer is a good one, but I want an honest answer. Do you think that obviously Trump is doing a lot right now, and the people that he is putting in there, I think, are doing a lot to dismantle these the spider web basically that has been put in place by these globalists and the deep state. And I kind of see them as kind of like they are kind of working together, right? The inside bureaucrats that are supporting this globalist agenda. Do you think that we can win? Do you think that we can hold these guys off, or we can change course, or is it too late? And then if we can win, what do we got to do?
Yeah. Well, I try really hard not to get into policy or prescription to that level, but I say that I give some very practical pieces of advice. And the first one is we have to reclaim God. It's not that modernity grew into thinking that religion is superstitious. Like the idea that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, that none of the Declaration and the Constitution makes sense if there is not a God above you and me, and he is a just God who can adjudicate what is good and what is bad in this world. And so if we reclaim God, that's going to lead us to understanding our government and the way that our government is supposed to operate. And it becomes a way in which we can see and begin to decouple ourselves in our own hearts and in our communities as well from this poisonous ideology of relativism. And then the other major piece of that is demanding that of our political leaders. And then the last piece of advice that I gave in the book, and I did not know if this was ever going to happen. And so to see Doge doing what they're doing is, you know, it's from the Parks and Rec episode, Ron Swanson is part of the task force to cut the government, you know. And so he's there with all the bureaucrats and he's got his slash it signs. I don't know if you know that scene, but he's the libertarian that works for the government. And he's like, slash it, slash it. So with Doge, I'm like, yes, slash it. But that's the last piece of advice I said in the book is we have to dismantle the fourth branch of government. We've got to get back to fewer than 1,000 government employees working in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
That includes members of Congress and the cabinet and special organization. And
and that's all about that collectivism stuff too. It applies even to government. The more they are collected in Washington, D.C., the more that the lobbyists have access to them, the more that the globalists have access to them because they use the lobbyists to push their agenda, and the less accountable they are to the people. I mean, in this state, and like I'm pro technology because of my career field, and I see the benefit of, look, why are these politicians even in DC? They should be back in their districts. They can do their meetings online. There's technology. Look, if the president of the United States can launch nuclear weapons, remotely and do it securely, they can vote securely. It is possible. Yeah. And if they can be back in their districts, it makes it harder for the lobbyists to get to them. And then they have to go and shop in the grocery store where the people who voted for them are going to see them and can approach them and give them hell about what they're doing. So I'm all for making sure that these folks are spending more time in their district and less time in Washington, D.C. Have them get together like once a quarter, for a quarterly meeting, and then the rest of their things should be back in their district.
Yeah, absolutely. But if we can do those things, and I think I set it up starkly, but it's the reality. We're either going to keep marching down this progressive route where we get more and more onerous government until you can make the argument now that Congress is just kabuki theater and they exist to pass the omnibus spending bills. But we're going to get to a point where it's an absolutely figurehead position and the real government is just the regulatory state. We're either going to get to that point and the rest of the West is going to get to that point, and then we're going to have this, what will end up inevitably happening as a globalist soft coup. They don't want the names of the countries to change or anything like that. Sure. They want a mandatory United Nations with a rule by expert class over the top of them. 3 guesses who they want to be the experts ruling over everybody. Yeah. But we're either going to live in that future, or we're going to live in a future where countries have their own sovereignty and our country looks a lot more like what the founders founded instead of what we have now.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, for one, I will not live in that future. I will absolutely resist it with everything within me. In fact, that's why I moved to West Virginia. So where I live,
that makes 2 of us.
where I live, the people here are not going to tolerate that kind of nonsense. There might be a few that go by, but there's enough people well armed here that they'll put up a good resistance. So, well, hey, I want to thank you for coming on the show today and sharing your heart and your thoughts and these articulating these ideas in your book. I really want to recommend. I put links up in both on the Foxhole and also in Rumble, and I'll make sure and go into my other places as well and put a link to where they can buy your book. I already have a few people that have already said they're definitely going to buy your book.
Awesome.
And I just want to, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a battle that is not against flesh and blood, but it is a spiritual battle against the forces of darkness and principalities and spiritual forces. And we got to remember that. And the only thing that fixes that is if we turn back to God as a nation. And I think what we need is a revival. That is the ultimate trump card, if you will, that that basically can undo everything that the devil has worked so hard to do in our country and in our Western world. Would be another great awakening. And that's what I'm praying for and hoping for. And because of that, I always end my show with prayer, because we talk a lot about what can we do and what we must do, and we certainly have to do our part, right? What is it? Faith without works is dead. But as a Christian, I know that the most important thing that I can do is to pray and plead with God and ask for God to bring righteous leadership and to remove the corrupt and to intervene in our nation and in our part of the world. So I want to go ahead and I always like to ask the question, though, before we pray and close the show. I want to just thank everybody who joined the show tonight. We got Chris P. Bancon, This Is My Story, Harry Legg, a lot of the my regulars that are in the chat, and I just want to thank you guys for joining tonight. We have some people that joined us on Facebook as well. Mike Turner, thank you for joining, Mike. Great man, helped me with my campaign when I ran for public office. We got folks that joined us from X, Diddy Girl, Mr. Matt Patriot. Thank you guys for your comments, and thank you for joining the show tonight and for being engaged, because I think that's what it takes. We have to stay engaged, and we've got to communicate. We can't just listen and do nothing about it. Over in the foxhole, we have Unchained 01. Thank you for joining us over there as well. And I want a special thanks to go out to the Patriots Prayer. They are the channel that that hosts my show, the Raising Cain Show, in over on in Rumble. So with all of that said, I want to go ahead and ask you the question that I always ask my guests on the kind of the last question, give you the final word, is we've talked about a lot of things tonight, but if there's one thing, because you know how short people's attention spans are. So if there was one thing that was the most important thing that they take away from our conversation, what would that be?
Well, the most important thing that anybody can walk away from this conversation from is that there is an ideological war being waged on you. It is being waged by your declared enemy, and they have set up a massive game, and it's their game, and you have to lose in order for them to win. And they have every intention of winning. And if you don't wake up to their schemes and their games and claim the sovereignty that you have through the greatest country in the world, America will fall, and you will live in the future that they tell you to live in. So let's dethrone our would-be overlords, save America, save our children and grandchildren in the process.
Amen to that. Amen. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close us in prayer, and then we'll end the show. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you so much, Lord, for what you are doing in this country, Lord, that you have been bringing about a change, Lord, that you have just truly moved on the hearts of the people, which is evident by the fact that despite all of the cheating, despite all of the everything that the left has tried to destroy this nation, that we still were able to elect President Trump. And I believe, Lord, that was by your hand. Lord, I pray that you would guide and direct the current administration, God, that they would have the wisdom and the authority to remove the corrupt and destroy these systems in which the globalists have taken control of, that they would dismantle the fourth branch, that they would get rid of the the bureaucracy's power, and that the power would truly be returned back to the people. Lord, I pray that you would awaken the hearts and the minds of the American people, that they would no longer sit idly by from the sidelines, going about their day and their business, just trying to make ends meet, but that they would take an active role in their destiny and in their future and the future for their children. I pray, God, that you would awaken them, that they would be not only diligent in their efforts at trying to take back our country and back our sovereignty, but Lord, they would also take back their spiritual authority as well, Lord, especially the Christians in this nation who have unfortunately have relinquished that authority all too often. Pray you'd wake up the church, Lord. I pray for a great awakening in this nation, for a great revival in this land, and not just here, but Lord, that it would spread across the ocean, and it would spread to Canada, and would spread to South America, Lord, that it would just absolutely take over, and that we would see a great revival, Lord, and a great return to you. Because, Lord, we've been living in darkness for too long, and we need that change, and only you can bring it. Lord, I pray you bless our guests, Lord, that Teddy Pierce, he would have a great success in his book, Lord, that you would bless his family, his children, his wife, and Lord, that you would just help him to be successful in spreading this message against this evil doctrine of demons, Lord, of relativism. And I pray, Lord, that you would bless everybody on the show tonight and everybody that sees this show, that they would take away from this everything you want them to see and hear, and just bless everyone tonight in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, Teddy, thank you again for joining the show. Where can people, I put the link up in both the Foxhole and in Rumble. So if you're not on either of those channels, you can go and look in Rumble in the show notes. I'll make sure it's in there, but also I'll try to get on the other places. And if you have if you have like an ad or something like that for it, shoot that over to Jeanette, and we'll make sure and put it on all of our social media for your book. Okay. Like a picture for it, and with the link. Folks, make sure that you check this book out. It is an excellent book. And Teddy, where can people follow you? Are you on social media?
Yes, I'm on X at TeddyP1776, and have a Rumble channel with the book trailer, some other videos on Rumble, same handle, TeddyP1776.
Great. Thank you for that. And folks, remember to like and subscribe our channel. Please retweet the channel, retweet this video. If you liked what you heard tonight, make sure and let people know. And remember to stay vigilant, stay prayerful. May God bless you, and may God bless America. Have a good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless, day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change. Time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.